Heinrich Valentine, thank you so much. Welcome. And then we have Advocate John Moodey. I'm going to come back to you because I'm also lost there. My colleagues are embarrassing me here. They don't have all the names on this list. Advocate John Moodey. Oh, Advocate. Oh, my God. Hey, John Moodey. No, I'm surrounded by advocates. You know, the other day I called our national chairperson the director, the director of operations, Michael Beaumont, but it seems to be these conversations a lot. Thank you, John, for being here. And then I believe we have Lizette Lancaster from the Institute of Security Studies. Welcome. Thank you very much for being here. I didn't get your name. Nadine Duplessis, you are from? Nadine Duplessis is here to observe. So thank you, Nadine, for being here. We appreciate you. Without much further ado, it is 10:05. I'm hoping we'll be done by 12 o'clock. We do have someone online. Okay, we have someone online, and is Prof. Sam Koma. Okay, Themba Masuku from the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum. Not sure what is happening to Lerato today. Themba Masuku is from the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum. Thank you, Themba. Do we have Themba online? Can we see him? Themba, can you hear us? He's online. Okay. Themba, welcome. Thank you very much. Let me give the first speaker, Mr. Herman Mashaba, to address. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lerato, and welcome to everyone. Really appreciate your participation in this very important exercise. I think just to really give you some kind of background, as all of you are aware, ActionSA is the brainchild of engagements of South Africans. This party was founded by a project called the People's Dialogue, launched on the 6th of December 2019, ran for 3 months. 2.4 million South Africans gave us the mandate to start this political party. Eventually launched on the 29th of August. So in a few weeks' time, we'll be actually celebrating 3 years of our existence. But we're a party obviously founded on engaging South Africans on everything that we do, because as a political party, we believe we owe it to South Africans to guide us. We don't have the solutions to the country's complex and myriad of challenges. I remember when I resigned made an announcement to resign as the mayor of the city of Johannesburg. People saying, Mashaba, start a political party. I said, my goodness, where do I start? I'd never really been in politics before serving as executive mayor of the city of Johannesburg. In fact, making matters even worse, when I accepted to be the mayor of the city of Johannesburg, I had no clue whatsoever what the mayor does. But I accepted to be the mayoral candidate. I had no clue, And now all of a sudden, I was asked to start a political party. And obviously, Andre, Michael, and I conceived the idea of starting the People's Dialogue to engage South Africans to firstly achieve 2 major things. Firstly, all these people were asking me to start a political party. Were they real people? We wanted a scientific basis, that it's not people phoning for radio stations or posting information on social media, writing articles in the papers. You wanted a scientific basis to establish whether these are real people or not. But also, more importantly, was to establish whether we share the same values. Because, as you can imagine, actually in 24 days' time, I'll be 10 in 2064. So probably I'm the oldest person in this room. So I'm not a young man. So I lived half of my life under an evil system of apartheid. So obviously, based on being born in 1959 and H.F. Verwoerd at the time. Remember, H.F. Verwoerd took over as a prime minister in 1958, and a year later, I was brought into this world. So I was really born in really very difficult times, but obviously we thought at the time, we grew up thinking that the ANC, it's a home for all of us, including, fast forward to 1994, voted for them into power, excited for the first time in my life, excited with the concept of really being a South African, and made even much more exciting by a dream by Desmond Tutu of the Rainbow Nation. I think it was the best time to really be a South African at the time. But obviously, a few years down the line, during Thabo Mbeki's time, I felt personally betrayed by the direction the ANC was taking. And then 2019, fast forward to 2015, became the mayor of this, 2016, became the mayor of the city of Johannesburg under the DA banner. Another massive disappointment. So obviously, people asking me to start a political party, that's well and good, you've got the numbers, but do I share the same values with those people? So we then obviously really engaging South Africans on the core values of our party. And obviously, the rule of law, it's really one of those aspects that I personally believe that there's no chance of ever growing an economy or society or country without the respect for the rule of law. It's just not really possible. So I'm glad that you've accepted to participate in this particular aspect of one of the core values of ActionSA. We are engaging South Africans again, so that by the time we go to our inaugural policy conference from the 12th to the 14th of September, that we've engaged South Africans like we did when we started this organization, because we believe we don't really have the answers. Just to really give a sense of the presentation I've given to some of the panels before the opening remarks, where we're saying that the concept of the American dream was coined in a best-selling book in 1931 titled Epic of America. That dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement. Essentially, the belief that anyone, regardless of where they were born or what race or class they were born into, can attain their own version of success in a society in which upward mobility is possible for everyone. This is Action South African Dream, our vision for our nation. The rule of law dream. Yes, I've already to really give you some background. Imagine a South Africa that has reclaimed its position among the leading developing economies of the world. In this South Africa, all our people feel safe and secure in their homes and communities, and are served by caring and competent security forces. Imagine a judicial system that is effective and fair, an immigration regime that unlocks the benefits of international cooperation while protecting the interest of its people, which are the South Africans. The foundation of our law and order dream. And I will obviously elaborate on all of them later on. Firstly, it's an independent and effective institutions, strong communities, competent and resource security services, reformative criminal justice system, international rule of law, and immigration. And now let me then go into each one of them, a little bit of elaboration. Independent, effective institutions. Implementing our laws require effective institutions that function independently from political interference. This includes criminal and civil courts, judicial justice department, arbitration bodies, correctional services, police services, military and intelligence services. Requires that we rethink funding, security of tenure, and creating bigger divide between political bodies and institutions. We must improve access to justice for all South Africans. So I don't really have to really tell you the reason why we are going through what we have really become a norm in our country, being the murder capital of the world, the rape capital of the world, because corruption being our way of life. It's because of the capture of our criminal justice system. We believe independent, effective institutions are key in terms of the rule of law. We need strong and stable communities. Communities are one of the key drivers of personal and societal well-being. We must foster communities that are caring and inclusive. Increase cooperation between law enforcement agencies, municipalities, and communities to keep our people safe. Communities also core to providing social support and addressing social ills like GBV, drug abuse, interpersonal violence, requires ethical community leadership. Competent resource security services. Our security services have been captured by political interest groups, and cadre deployment has destroyed the professionalism of our law enforcement agencies, more especially the police. And it's not only the police. If you look at whether it's the NPA, and I'm actually getting really very worried lately because, you know, the last few years, personally, I was concerned with the police and the NPA. But I'm beginning to get concerned about our judiciary as well. So I think we don't have time on our side to really get this the situation corrected. Prioritize security expenditure to frontline service delivery, away from VIP protection, and ensure law-abiding citizens can live without fear. We cannot have a situation where the budget of our VIP protection services is more than the actual police. You go to police stations today, they don't have generators, they don't have the necessary support system. We have the VIP protection services where, as South Africans, every time I get onto the road, I see the VIP protection, I run away because you can really be assaulted like a criminal. You know, I mean, that's what our country has become. Improve professionalism, accountability, community-oriented policing practices. One thing that we must accept as South Africans, if we are not going to professionalize our public service, we can forget about running an effective, prosperous nation. And at the same time, I think we have to, all of us as South Africans, work on not on the basis of anything else except merit. And that's something that we have really failed. Prioritize training, modernizing equipment, in revamping intelligence services. Reformative criminal justice system, and I think I've got this as much as I think I'd like us later on to really have a debate on this, on the reformative criminal justice system. I'm talking about improving the efficiency of prosecuting capacity central to holding criminals accountable. However, we must also focus on reforming criminals to ensure that they have the opportunity to re-enter society and contribute. And I think it's something that I think we need to really debate what we mean by reforming criminals. My view is that we absolutely need to really reform them so that when they come back into society, they can contribute positively. But while they are in prison, they must be criminals. We cannot afford a situation where 54% of our people today we're sitting here, they live below the breadline. So I cannot understand, I believe and accept the fact that I will spend more money to looking after criminals than looking after law-abiding citizens. So I think it's something that, as South Africa, we need to really look at. I remember on Sunday, I read Justice Cameron's visitation to the prisons, and came out very strong on behalf of criminals. But at the same time, I don't hear people talking about the plight of poor people, law-abiding people who live without toilets. We complain about overcrowded criminals sharing 2 toilets. We've got communities 10 minutes away from here who've lived for the last 20 years. They don't have toilets, law-abiding citizens. So we then have to say, as a society, where do we channel our resources? The challenge is to find the correct balance between accountability and reform, but we cannot continue to tolerate the high reoffending rate, because it looks like that's why the criminals have now realized it's better in prison than outside, because outside, no job opportunities, no meals, so I'd rather be in prison, get 3 meals a day, get a bed, and I'll have so-called human rights lawyers fighting for me. But when you're outside as a law-abiding citizen, no one stands for you. So I think it looks like we are actually incentivizing criminals to keep on committing crime because they're taken care of. Because what you do if you're a man or a woman without a job, with no rights whatsoever, because it looks like human rights applies when you're on the wrong side of the law. So rather than keep on committing crime because you are short of free accommodation, you are short of 3 meals a day. Whereas when you are outside, no one cares whether you've got anything to eat or not. No one really cares. What are the chances of finding employment? Almost next to nothing. If you look at our youth in particular, what are the chances of them getting jobs? In fact, the few that are working today, in South Africa, you are sure that every year, South Africans are going to lose jobs. So that's why South Africa today is known all over the world to have the highest sustainable unemployment rate in the world. If you look at other countries, their unemployment goes up and down, whereas in South Africa, over the last 20 years, our unemployment in the world is the one that always keeps going up. So you are assured in South Africa, the few that are working, that every year South Africa's unemployment goes up because of the underperforming economy, because of lots of other factors that some of them have already highlighted. So we need to really look at our criminal justice system. International rule of law. Interlinked with foreign policy, South Africa must be a global citizen for human rights, and that includes enforcing global treaties. South Africa has become easy target for transnational criminal organization, must improve our intelligence gathering and international cooperation. Have to eradicate trade in illicit goods, drugs, and human trafficking. You know, I had the privilege or the experience to be the mayor of the city of Johannesburg for 3 years. It'll break your heart to really look at the extent of brutal human trafficking in this country. You look at the extent of illicit trade, billions of goods brought into this country, expired goods. We're a dumping a destination for countries with expired goods that they cannot sell in their countries. They sell them here. They don't pay taxes on them. And then who buys them? Not to you and I, because we buy from proper shops. Who buys those expired goods? The poor communities, law-abiding poor communities. The drugs. You look at the effect of drugs on our youth. I mean, how as a nation we are prepared to sit back and say we need to set up a drug rehab center. And for one, in support as a short-term measure for the establishment of drug rehab center. I established that was the first the mayor or municipality to have official proper rehab centers when I was the mayor of the city of Johannesburg. But this has got to really be a short-term measure. We cannot allow international criminal syndicates to take our country as a playground for them to come and destroy not only our youth, our communities, and be expected to sit back and watch the families and people being really destroyed. Immigration, very important one. We need immigration reform. South Africa should be welcoming to people of the world, but we must protect the sovereignty of our nation. We stand for immigration reform, and we must strengthen our borders, but make it legal entry easier, particularly for skilled and semi-skilled foreign nationals. We must reform the Department of Home Affairs so that they provide better services to people visiting our country. We must treat refugees and asylum seekers with compassion. Ensure that tourists can visit South Africa and investors can do business in South Africa without bureaucratic hurdles. I think all of us can accept. I mean, you look at us on this table. We're the people of this country. We are the people who have built this country. South Africa, over the last 400 years, built at the back of migrants. And the only way we can continue building on what has happened in the past is to encourage people of the world to come to South Africa. But they must come here legally, and when they're here, they must respect our laws. I think it's an international practice. I find it difficult and unacceptable for anyone saying by articulation of such issues, we are being xenophobic. And South Africans, before I started raising these matters in 2016, South Africans were silenced. Everyone was too scared to talk about this matter until I decided, no ways. I think I looked at our constitution. Our constitution is really for encouraging people of the world to come to South Africa. We are actually failed by Home Affairs and the current government because they are part of the problem of the illegal foreign nationals coming into our country. We're sitting with a major time bomb that if we're not going to do anything about it, this country is going to fail. Because all these people who have silenced or wanted to silence South Africa, I don't know obviously what their agendas are, but I can really think that there must be some benefit, because I cannot understand how anyone can defend such an issue that is defenseless. But there are people who would stand out there. I'm one of those that is being humiliated, called names, insulted, because, and it's our constitution that's saying so. So it's our laws of this country. That's why I've always maintained that if you call me xenophobic, therefore the laws of South Africa then are xenophobic. That's why when I was reported by the ANC to the South African Human Rights Commission in 2017, and they did a thorough investigation trying to find anything where I've broken the law, to find that it was the law of the country. So obviously, they said if Mashaba is xenophobic, that means the authors of our constitution and our laws are xenophobic, because this is what South Africa, the South African laws are saying. So it's really something that for us as ActionSA, we don't want to stand on a fence on it, but at the same time, without any doubt, we know and accept and understand that there are people out there who are running away from despots and so forth, who South Africa needs to show compassion towards them, and we look after them. But they must be documented. There's this debate. Earlier this week, I had an interview with one of the journalists around the number of undocumented people. And I must have a debate whether we've got 15 million or undocumented foreign nationals or not. I said, please, I don't want to get involved in such nonsense. I don't want to live, as Herman Mashaba, I just want to declare, I don't want to live in a country where we have one undocumented person. Because in South Africa, by law, as I'm talking to you right now, there's a woman giving birth. Immediately upon giving birth, this child must be given a birth certificate. It's not something that you do because it's a nice thing to do. It is by law. A person must be immediately registered. That birth must be registered so that you know at any point in time how many people are in the country. Every time someone today, there are kids, you can go to Home Affairs, who have 10, 16, they must immediately be documented. They must get IDs. It is the law. It's not something that they do it because it's a nice thing to really have an ID book. Right now, as I'm talking to you, be in hospital or at home, there's a South African dying. Upon the person dying, that person, there must be a birth certificate. Now, if we've got all this for South Africans, then how do we justify saying people from anywhere in the world can come to South Africa? We must not ask that they be documented. I don't understand that logic. I don't really want to even any longer debate about the number. There must not be a single person in this country without the necessary documentation. You come here running from despot. Home Affairs has got a responsibility to ensure that you are immediately documented if you qualify. Documented if you qualify, because there are people coming into this country, they come into this country for wrong reasons. And the law is very clear who do I qualify to get asylum's permission or not. And those who are coming here to sell our youth drugs, or people coming here for nefarious reasons, we must send them back to their countries. It is the law of this country. And I think it's something that for us as ActionSA, we are saying we cannot afford to really stand on a fence on this particular matter. Because the law, as lawyers, you know very well, the law cannot really be selective. It doesn't mean that if you are compassionate around illegal immigrants, you feel sympathetic, you want to bring your Ubuntu into the mix. You know what will happen? Ubuntu then must apply because tomorrow someone in my street might rape a woman and it's someone that I like. And I really say, but please, I mean, this guy was brought up well. This rape must really be something that we must accept. Let's give him a second chance. And now the next day, someone else was going to feel compassionate about a murderer. And then where do we stop? Then what's the point of then having laws if our laws are going to be that flexible? I'm not a lawyer myself. I think you guys, as a legal fraternity, coming from the legal fraternity, you can tell me whether my interpretation of the law it's not fair or not, because I always keep telling South Africans and people of the world that my knowledge of law is very dangerous. In 1978, when I was doing my matric, I applied to study law. So the only paper that I can produce about law is the University of the North, Limpopo, accepting me in 1979 to study law. And then when I went the first week of orientation in 1979, discovered that I cannot pursue a legal profession. Why? Because I had failed Afrikaans. So the only thing about law that I can officially produce is an acceptance letter from the university that I'm allowed to study law. So my knowledge of law is very dangerous. But I think law, to a large extent, operates on common sense as well. And it's a question that I think for you as lawyers must really guide us whether as ActionSA we are unreasonable or not in our approach to this issue and our belief in the rule of law. Thank you so much for really making the time to listen to us. Lerato, back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ntate Mashaba. Themba Masuku, he's online. Themba, can we hear you or see you?
Yes, good morning. I can hear you very well. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Good morning.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Thank you very much, Ntate Mashaba, for the presentation. I think we'll take Lizette next. Are you ready? Fantastic. The mic is on. I think just switch it on from the bottom, or is it on the front? Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Please take it away. Do you have a presentation?
Yes, I do.
All right. Yeah. All right.
Thanks. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It's always wonderful to be able to share the scientific research we have been involved in and present some evidence of what we think will work in South Africa towards better law and order and safety for our children and the next generations. So I'm Lizette Lancaster. I'm the manager of the Crime and Justice Information Hub at the Institute for Security Studies. I've got, almost 30 years experience. I was trained as a lawyer, but I'm a policy researcher at heart. The law environment was very harsh, and I decided that I like to pursue more idealistic goals, I think, in terms of trying to see what policy research is needed in this country. So I was lucky enough to go into a new South Africa as a trained lawyer, later doing my master's degree in development studies. Graduated in 1995. My younger colleagues tell me that I should redo law, because if you haven't studied the new constitution, only the interim constitution, you know nothing. So, but fortunately for me, I have been able to be part of discussions and research on the Constitution and other matters dealing with the rule of law going forward. So the next slide, please. The Institute for Security Studies is an independent African non-profit policy research institution enhancing human security through research, policy advice, and capacity building.
Sorry to say it.
Yes.
Switch mics.
Oh, is this better? Oh, goodness, yes. So our aim is contributing to a stable and peaceful Africa as a continental organization, characterized by sustainable development, human rights, the rule of law, democracy, and collaborative security. We've got offices across the continent and people from over 20 countries working for us on all sorts of peace, and from peacekeeping, marine security, crime and violence, migration, and other issues. Next. So I thought before we get to solutions, it is always very useful to just frame what we're dealing with. And we get a lot of really good research that we can build on from international organizations. Now, this is what we call the risk factors for violence and crime, but the framework is called the ecological model by the World Health Organization, which looks at violence as basically a pandemic. And we know that that is one of our biggest challenges in this country. So the root causes and the risk factors doesn't lie in a single place. It doesn't lie within an individual necessarily, but it's a whole system, an ecology that creates the violence that we talk about and we deal with daily. And it deals with individual factors that have to do with everything from being exposed to violence very early on, in people's homes, to maltreatment, psychological issues and such, to the relationships that children deal with their parents and in their lives, right through to community issues, right through to societal issues such as apartheid and the consequences thereof, such as inequality. Next. So a study we were part of is a Birth to 30 study that was finished. It started just before the end of apartheid, and the results 30 years on was 2018. So it looked at children that were born in, what was it, I have to work at 88, 89, right through to where they are today. And what we found is that 99% of these children experience adversity, of at least one form of adversity in their communities by the time they were 18. Now, this could be anything from poverty, discrimination, housing, poor housing, to stuff like physical and sexual abuse. Now, of course, not all these things are equal, but you can imagine a child that has to go through severe trauma of sexual and emotional violence is of course, that's far worse than maybe just dealing with poverty as a child, depending on the loving environment you're in and such. So compared to other countries, the UK and USA, 50% of kids had at least one adverse experience. And there we go. Next slide, please. So what does adverse childhood experiences mean? If you face quite a number of these, it means that you will have poor health and poor well-being as a child, which impacts on your human capital as well as human development. And it makes you at risk for certain issues, such as injury, of course. You can imagine if a child is abused, right through to mental health issues, maternal health outcomes, especially because of unintended pregnancies and so on, infectious diseases, chronic diseases because of the stresses and mental health issues, such as cancer and diabetes, risky behavior, and we see it often in our children, alcohol and drug abuse, unsafe sex, opioid misuse, and especially rife in places like America, but also here with Niobe and all sorts of abuses that we know of. And of course, opportunities for education, occupation, and income. Next slide, please. So, 87% of children in this study in South Africa were exposed to at least 4 of these ACEs by the time they were 18. Of course, 2 ACEs have been found internationally to make you more at risk for criminality. 3 to 4 of these could lead to more criminality as well as psychological distress that you can imagine the impact thereof on all aspects of life. 6 or more ACEs, not just criminality and psychological distress, but also persistent unemployment and incomplete schooling. This is without the structural issues still that we face, but because of the structural issues that we face. If you want to read more about that, it's by a colleague of ours, Sarah Nike. We supported it. The links are on the slides. But these, and a lot of our research is also on our Crime Hub, the crimehub.org website. So what can we do about this? And this is where all our solutions need to be aimed at, to safeguard the next generation. So the INSPIRE program, also an international program that we're part of, looks at 7 strategies for ending violence against children. And the first is implementation and enforcement of laws. The second is looking at our norms and our values and how we treat our children. The third is safe environments for our children. Many of us would agree that our environment is not safe for our children. how do we support our parents and our caregivers? That's the fourth element, because our parents and our caregivers of these children are enormously stressed, have no support, have to often wake up early, catch public transport, spend very little time with their children. And when they do so, they are so emotionally exhausted and mentally exhausted that it's hard to be present for their children. How do we support our caregivers? Income and economic strengthening. We don't need to even debate this, that you've said, Mr. Mashaba, how 54% of our people live in poverty. And then, of course, how do we respond to kids at risk? What are our response and what are our support services to these children? Are we able to identify children that have challenges at school and give them the support that they require, that are bullied, that have emotional stresses at home, that is dabbling with alcohol or drug abuse, that really need the support services of social workers and shelters and maybe rehab centers, as we were talking about. And also, what are we saying and what are we doing about education and life skills for these children? So that's on a systemic level. The next slide, please, talks about, and I know I don't have that much time, but there are, for the ISS, 4 main issues, and I'm so pleased Themba's on the call because he will expand, I'm sure, where I stop somewhere. But for us, there are 4 main priorities for public safety that we need to look at. If we can just look at these 4, and then by no means small little things that we just say is not that simplistic and can be fixed overnight. They are not. They really need an all of government, all of society approach. But it is reducing murder, and I'll tell you now why, tackling organized crime, building meaningful partnerships, and innovative crowd management. Next slide, please. So South Africa's murder rate over the past 50 years have been one that has been marked by extreme violence up until the democratic dispensation in 1993-94, although there was a lot of political conflict and violence. With the great political settlement, effective law enforcement, or towards that integration, transformation, and almost a trust issue, the Madiba and Magic, all of that. We also saw effective implementation of the Firearms Control Act, and it led to a 55% decrease in the murder rate in 18 years. So we've done it. We have done it. By 2010, when the World Cup happened, you saw this whole of society approach where people worked together, there was a common vision, and we managed to get our murder rate down to almost to under 30 murders per 100,000 population. Now, yes, the international average is by now 5.8 murders per 100,000, so we're still over 7 times that today, but we were getting there. Look at that steep decline of over 55%. Then what happened? A weakening of the criminal justice system, reduction in institutional trust, increased vigilante action, retaliations and group violence, increased organized crime and armed robberies. And by the time the annual crime stats will be released for 2022-23, we've seen a glimpse of it in the quarterly, we would have reached a 55% basically increase again from that moment. So it's not yet completely where we were, but we're getting there. We are very close to getting back to that. Next slide, please. So this was for the last annual crime statistics up to March 2022. 25,181 women and children and men murdered. Today, by March 2023, from the quarterly stats, we're looking at 27,272. Where a year and a bit ago we had about 69 people murdered daily in this country, we're now sitting at about 75 on average. So that daily figure, it's a bit higher now for those groups, but we are sitting at 3 children a day, 9 women and 57 men. So, but we know stuff about murder. We know that more than half of them happen over weekends because they are social in nature. It's because of all these ACEs that we saw that we are incapable of dealing with conflict in a non-violent way. We haven't been taught to use our words, if that makes any sense for those of you who have children. Our frustration levels are so high, whether you're middle class or whether you are in adverse conditions, that it's easy to throw a Zapfa sign in the traffic. It's easy to get so frustrated that you want to punch a wall. Because we all live in this society. None of us are immune. However, 20% of all murders happen in only 30 police stations out of 1,162. So we can start somewhere. Next slide, please. Can we reduce murder? Yes. So I also just need to take a step back. Murder is the ultimate result of all forms of violence. That's why we see it as a proxy. It's also the most reliable crime statistic. So whether it's GBV, whether it is zama-zamas, whether it's vigilantism, whatever the cause of the murder, if we understand it, we can work and prioritize what needs to be done to deal with violence. New York City, between 2000 and 2010, murder down 70%, robbery down 40%, by having priorities for murder reduction and robbery reduction. Bogota, Colombia, between 1994 and 2004, murder down 78%, robbery down 70%, again through targeted approaches that involved partnerships. Belize, Gauteng, aggravated robbery strategy 2009-2011 around the World Cup. Hijacking down 32%, residential robbery down 20%, non-residential robbery, so those are business robberies, down 19% in 2 years around the World Cup. We have done it before, we can do it again. And all it took was targeting the perpetrators, targeting the networks. So it's about thinking differently about what should be our priorities. Next slide. So why organized crime? Why should we focus on it? Whether it's zama-zamas, whether it's drug kingpins and groups, because they pose a fundamental threat to human security and national security. There's evidence that it's been escalating over the past 5 years. You just need to look at the crime stats and the reasons for most of the violence and murder to see that. There are proxy indicators such as kidnapping as well that show these increases. It undermines the state in that there are a clear nexus between the two. If I read you the definition of organized crime as it states and defined by the UN, you'll see what I mean. Organized crime is a continuing crime enterprise that rationally works to profit from illicit activities that are often in great public demand. So whether it's coal, whether it's construction, wherever there's an opportunity, these people move in. Its continuing existence is maintained through corruption of public officials and the use of intimidation, threats, or force to protect its operations. So that's where this nexus comes in. It's not a South African issue. it's an international issue as it's recognized. It needs corruption to survive. A key source of corruption is the criminal justice system in the state. Very often these people are very scary. They work at a local level. They know where you live as a policeman or police officer. And they will intimidate you. So you have a choice. Either you cooperate and take a bribe, or you deal with it. But it's become so systemic that we now face this growth. And it facilitates a wide range of other crimes. Next, please. So I'm just going to... So I don't need to tell you all the robbery networks. There are many of them, and they are linked. Next slide, please. So the main organization that deals with the investigation of priority crimes are the Hawks, the DPCI. Their budget is only about, if you look there on the first slide, less than just over 2 billion rand. You'll find it somewhere in a line item under detective service in the police. VIP protection makes up 52% of what they call protection and security services budget, which is closer to 4 million. So from the calculations we can make, about 167% of protection security services budget. So the protection and security services budget is about 167% that of the Hawks and 74% that of the NPA. So they protect just over 200 people, yet the Hawks and the NPA can service all 60 million people. Next slide, please. And this leads us to other conclusions. We hear the sentiments of the 60 million very often. What is it that we can do? Why do we need partnerships for police performance? It is because there's a double demand on policing, whether it's the Hawks, whether it's the police, whether it's Metro Police, whether anybody to do with law enforcement has a double demand. They need to be effective. The public expect the police to enforce the law and reduce incidences of crime. We just have to drive, those of us that live in Joburg, to know that it's become, I call it an extreme sport. And I say to the children, please don't speak to Mummy. I'm driving. Because you have to dodge potholes, people that don't follow the rules of the road, traffic lights that are out. So every day that people push in at William Nicol off-ramp or wherever you go, you erode the rule of law because laws mean nothing. So it starts with traffic, but it goes up further. The day that drug dealers stay where they stay and get away and you see them talk to the local police, trust is eroded, the rule of law is eroded, because if they can get away with it, I can get away with it. The police are also seen in many instances, whether it's the VIP protection unit, whether it is Andries Tatani in Vryburg, where was it? Vicksburg in the Free State. Police brutality erodes the rule of law and public trust because the police must be seen to treat the people they come into contact with professionally and fairly. So when we talk about policing and how to prioritize, we have to look at what operations do, how people are treated during these operations too, because evidence suggests that how people are treated during stop and searches and all of that has a huge impact. And we know this from places even like New York about how they will trust the police in the future and cooperate. Why is trust such an important issue? Because it's a partnership. I'll give you information, I'll bring crime to you because I trust you to deal with it. And we always talk about crime intelligence in this country being so eroded. But every day, citizens are the eyes and the ears of the police. We hear them say that. They are not willing to come forward to the police anymore as they used to. So how the police effectively deals with crime and violence is important, but also their conduct on a daily basis. Next slide. We have seen that disciplinary hearings in the police have reduced significantly. We have seen civil claims paid out by the police have increased significantly. So that 2.3 billion paid out in the past 5 years on civil claims are more than, one would argue, the Hawks budget. So, do we trust the police? Now, again, remember, South Africans are not always clear if it's Metro, if it's police. Only 27% trust the police in 2021, up from a high in 1999 of 47. So there was always a trust deficit, thanks to apartheid. But it's now even worse. If you look at Gauteng, it's only 19% of the public that trust the police. Next slide. And I'm talking too long, I know. I'm going to skip over crowd management. We can talk about that. And Themba is far more well-versed if that's part of his presentation. Next slide, please. So my last slide is how can we improve public safety in dealing with this South African Police Service. I have spoken about some of these aspects. The first is effective leadership. Capable leadership with a set vision and strategy that influence organizational culture. There's the saying that says that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Thank you. If we don't fix this culture, no matter what you do, and having had some work that, having had some impact or on the NPA, working with them, we have seen how difficult it is to change an eroded culture. So it's a big ship. So we need experienced, capable, and people with unquestionable integrity and able to problem solve, innovate, and communicate to different organizations. We need prioritization. We need to focus on the 20% of criminals that cause 80% of the crime. We have to. We can't try and police all 60 million people. We can't try and police every crime. We really need to figure out what we need to do to prioritize. We need an analytical capability and intelligence to understand the nature of the crime challenge at a higher level. By just looking at murder, for instance, we know where they happen mostly. So let's go there. But it's a whole of society approach. It's not Benoni or Boksburg, Zama, terrible incident, we go in and we come out. No, we have to stay. We have to make plans. We have to work with communities, Eldorado Park, whatever this issue is. And it cannot just be the police. But we need to build this analytical capability and intelligence. That is critical. And it's not just crime intelligence. It's by understanding and analyzing the problems on the ground. If it is as simple as Gogo Dlamini getting robbed, street robbery, every Friday night at a certain place as she gets out of the taxi, what makes that place so vulnerable? There's a lot of research, evidence-based research, that show that we can do hotspot policing to eliminate things like street robbery that actually makes up 60% of aggravated robberies in this country. Those people graduate to the cash and transit robbers that we all focus on. But where do they start? And solutions are possible. So we need clear, practical, and workable plans, and we need to establish those meaningful partnerships. It's been so eroded. How do we get that back? And I'm going to end there, and I apologize if I've taken too long.
Yeah, the hairs on my neck are standing on the back of my neck, terribly so. But thank you so much, Lizette, for those insights. Questions will come up later because I was prompted to ask you some in between. We've got Themba Masuku online, who is from the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum. I've got my tongue back. Themba, can you hear us? I'm going to allow Themba to come through because I think Lizette mentioned him a lot, and I'm sure you are going to edify everything that Lizette has said or not. But we're happy for you to do that. If we can have his presentation flighted, okay. So Themba, give us 1 second while you get ready. In the meantime, can we see Themba? Can we see his face? Where's our technical team?
My camera is definitely on. I can see myself on my own screen.
Can you see us?
So I can see all of you, yes.
Okay, that's an unfair advantage, colleagues. Okay, all right. Temperature, can we increase the temperature in the room? Oh, all right, so it's already on. There we go. Welcome, Themba. Thank you so much. We can see you now. Thank you so much. All right, as soon as the presentation comes up, you're welcome to start. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Thank you very much, and good morning to the leadership of ActionSA, Lizette, a good colleague of mine. I've been working with Lizette for a very long time, so I probably knew what she was going to present, and probably she knows what I'm going to present. But let me just say that my presentation this morning was quite restricted in the sense that I was asked to focus on just one issue out of many issues that we're working on. But just as a brief introduction, my name is Themba Masuku. I work for, African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum. We exist really to support institutions of democracy, particularly in the policing environment, around strengthening both internal oversight mechanisms and external police oversight mechanisms. We contribute quite significantly in strengthening, for example, your IPID, and we work also in the region, on the continent, with police organizations in strengthening their own both internal and external oversight mechanisms. So I am. I'm not sure whether I'm a lawyer, but yeah, I'm on my 4th chapter of my doctoral studies in law. I also I have a master's in social sciences. That is where I started actually as a social scientist, interested mainly in the work of police. And I've been doing this work for the last 20 years, having worked for the Center for the Study of Violence, the Institute for Security Studies with Lizette, and other organizations in South Africa that are focused on issues of policing and security. So that's basically a very, very brief background. Okay, maybe let's go into the next slide. So I've been asked to look at the community police forums, but the way that I want to start is to locate community policing forums within the concept of community policing. And community policing is a policing approach which was adopted post-1994 to enable a transition from autocratic policing to a more democratic policing. It was deliberately designed to lessen the gap, to bridge the gap between law enforcement and communities, to deal with a number of issues that paralyzed the two constituencies, that is the police and communities. So this was really a policy designed to enable collaboration. So it was a shift that was necessary, both to respond to the political environment, but also to respond to policing challenges. And I think one of the biggest challenges post-1994 was the trust deficit, the issue of polarization, and the issue of just dealing with crime and violence. And part of what the concept of policing, community policing, sought to address was to ensure that the state has the capability and capacity to provide policing services, capability to provide safety to communities. But in doing that, there was a recognition that it requires communities to be part of policing. Please don't move until I've asked you to. Let's go back to that slide. Thank you. So it is a concept that is embedded in principles of partnership, service orientation, joint problem solving, empowerment, and accountability of key role players. Here, the key role players are communities and community structures working together with the police. So the idea of partnership was a recognition that both the police and the communities have a role to play, and a critical role to play in addressing the issues of crime and violence. And again, the issue of service orientation was the idea that the services that are provided must be orientated in addressing the key issues, issues around empathy, issues around responsiveness, issues around addressing the issues that communities are facing on the ground. Joint problem solving was really about a deeper understanding that in order to solve crime, you require a number of elements. And one element that was required was the involvement of communities, both to provide information, but also to provide as witnesses. So the trust deficit in the criminal justice system was very important, particularly in policing. But also the issue of empowerment and accountability was also very important to ensuring that both communities and the police are accountable for ensuring that there's peace and security and safety that communities are enjoying. So it is a principle that is anchored on principles of active citizenry, police responsiveness, partnership, service orientation, problem solving, inclusivity, and empowerment. It requires communities to volunteer their time, resources, and close that gap. And we see this gap between police and the communities actually re-emerging and widening. And the police are also quite concerned about the gap that is widening, because part of what community policing really requires is closing the gap so that the two communities and the police are able to work together. Because then it allows for joint identification of risk factors. And we see a number of risk factors emerging. some of the risk factors really around what Lizette has been talking about, the extent to which, for example, bylaws are enforced, the extent to which law actually is enforced, the extent to which people simply violate laws with impunity, and the extent to which communities actually play a role in ensuring that people abide and adhere to the laws of this country are also very, very important. So it allows the concept of community policing was enabling policy to allow for communities and the police to work together. Next slide, please. So this was enabled in a number of legislations, and I'm not going to go through these policy legislative instruments, but the framework for community police forums is laid out in Chapter 12 of the National Development Plan, and part of what it requires there is that communities have to play a very important role, but also they need to be resourced and capacitated to ensure that they are quite effective. Then there's a crime prevention strategy that also talks to almost like a collaborative kind of a situation where a number of role players play a critical role in dealing with issues of crime. In the integrated crime prevention strategy, the integrated urban development framework, the integrated social crime prevention strategy, community policing strategy, and the white paper on policing, the interim regulations for community police forums and boards produced in 2001. All these, central to all of these instruments is emphasis on the role of communities in dealing with crime. So communities have become quite central in addressing the issues of crime and violence. And they will tease out exactly why has it not been as successful as it ought to be. Next slide, please. So some of the principles that are quite important just to flag around the issue of community police forums, which are also part of the philosophy of community policing, is that there's emphasis on the principle of inclusion, that no one should be left behind. Everyone in the community has to be part of the solution to crime and violence problems in their communities. The issue of partnerships, the issue of active participation, the issue of whole of society, accountability, transparency, active engagement, active participation, intentionality, and self-reflection. These have become quite important principles, particularly given our crime and violence situation. That if we're intentional, like some of the issues that Lizette was flagging, that we've done it before. We've seen how focused the country was when it was the World Cup. There was in the diplomacy, in the mobilization of society. So part of the intentionality is that there needs to be a political will in ensuring that the system actually works. The system that is designed to work is constantly applied oil and greased to ensure that the wheels are turning. When what we've seen is that when there's no political will, when there's no intentionality, there's polarization that takes place, and the system simply becomes dysfunctional. Next slide, please. So the framework for CPF, some of the emphasis is around oversight of local policing. Here, the idea is that CPFs have to play an important role in addressing community complaints related to service delivery, complaints related to police corruption, complaints related to responsiveness, of police to public complaints, and complaints related to gender-based violence and how police respond to those kind of issues. So there was a level of oversight that was very important when the whole issue of community police forums was introduced. So CPF had to play a role, and part of that role was to ensure that local stations were performing and delivering to communities. And we see a level of departure in terms of the relationships between community police forums and stations. That is kind of changed, and that is kind of weakened the level of oversight, or the level at which the extent to which communities are able to hold local police stations accountable for the crime situation in their communities. Community engagement. Here, the idea was around community police forums engaging with communities in terms of mobilizing communities to community meetings to basically to deal with their local level challenges. So these meetings were designed as a way of getting feedback from communities, but as a way of communicating back to communities around programs that were happening related to policing in their areas. It was also around mobilizing stakeholders in communities. Here, stakeholders would have been local business people, the taxi industry, political parties, private security in communities. All these stakeholders are very important at a community level to have a common understanding of the challenges that are happening at their localities. Because businesses, to strive, they need to have input in terms of challenges that they're experiencing. Again, political parties also play a very important role, that at the community level, they become community members who are interested in the safety and security of their own communities. And also, these community engagements were also around raising awareness. There's a lot of dumping that is happening in many communities. I mean, I was driving recently in my next door township. The level of just dumping is. So part of what the dumping does is that it deteriorates the environment, and crime and violence thrives in communities that are kind of dysfunctional, and this issue of dumping and deteriorating the environment, it has become a very important risk factor that community police forums must confront together with the police. So community patrollers, here the idea also was that there are things that communities can do, and in some communities this has been happening very well, where, for example, communities play a role closer to schools, that allowing traffic or controlling traffic, allowing children that are walking to school safe passage. So all those things were designed to ensure that communities have an active role, participate actively in ensuring that there's safety, public safety and security in their own communities. Next slide, please. So what are some of the challenges that we see in the functionality or in the functioning of community police forums? One is the lack of resources. I think the state has not done very well in resourcing community police forums so that they become effective. So the relationship between the police and communities, part of the widening of the gap has been largely because in as much police are better resourced. So because they're better resourced, they're trained, they assume more power, right? They're working with communities that lack resources, that are not trained. As a result, the relationship between the two becomes dysfunctional. So the power balance between the two become uneven. So part of what has been a challenge has been that there's been lack of funding, a funding model that speaks to the training of community police forums and resourcing of these police forums to ensure that they are effective in the mandate of what they're supposed to be doing in communities. But the other challenge as well has been around performance management. There is no integrated performance management system to monitor and evaluate the performance of community police forums. So policymakers do not know what community police forums on the ground are doing, because there's no system that speaks to what they're doing, or at least that monitors what they're doing. So when you can't know what they're doing, then it becomes very, very difficult to deploy resources to improve, because you don't know what to improve, because there's no monitoring system that monitors that kind of performance. But again, the community police forums have become centers of struggle. We've seen interest groups emerging in communities with the idea of capturing community police forums. In my own community, a particular political party has mobilized, for example, to really take over community police forums. So it's no longer a community police forum that is embracing of everybody in a community. I mean, there are quite a lot of opportunities of becoming part of the CPF. Part of it is around access to police stations. Part of it is around access to crime statistics. Part of it is around access to opportunities that are available to people that are participating in the CPF. I mean, CPF become leaders in the community when it comes to issues of safety and security. So it is a privileged position to be in that. But the concern is that there's been quite a power struggle centered around self-interest. Because our research tells us, for example, that in other communities, tax associations or tax industry have also mobilized themselves to take over CPFs. Political parties at times have mobilized themselves to take over CPFs. So it has almost become a polarizing CPF because of just lack of that community orientation that they become almost like power struggles that have emerged. But again, this is also caused by the fact that there is no clear criteria and qualification for people to become members. The only qualification is that you must not have a criminal record and you must be resident in a particular community. But that on its own is problematic, is that then CPF are not attracting the right timber of people, the right caliber of people with skills, with competencies, with capacity to implement programs. In affluent areas, one thing that we've seen, for example, that distinguished some of these CPFs is that they attract people with capacity. They attract lawyers. They attract accountants. They attract people who are able to come with resources. So in less affluent areas, they are attracting people that are unemployed. People are looking for opportunities. People come in and gatekeep to see so that they are in the front queue of whenever the opportunities for employment or recruitment as police officers. So it becomes very complicated when there is no clear criteria who is supposed to be part of a community police forums, other than just no criminal record. And again, there are challenges around governance and accountability. I think there's been quite a challenge between what is the role of SAPS, what is the role of Civilian Secretariat, and what is the role of Provincial Secretariat. That has not been very clear. So it comes that as a result of lack of clarity, the level of support that CPFs are supposed to be getting, they're not getting, because of no one knows what role they're supposed to be playing in providing capacity. And at times you see these tensions emerging between the role that SAPS is playing and the role that Civilian Secretariat is playing and the role that Provincial Secretariats are playing. So at times these manifest in kind of tensions between the key role players that are supposed to be providing the support. Next slide, please. So what are the opportunities? We still believe that community policing as a policing approach is still needed, is still relevant. The trust deficit, the community involvement is still very important. I think it's not just a cliche to say that communities are the eyes and the ears of community, but they can be very effective when there is a genuine relationship or partnership that emerges between communities and the police. So we think that community policing as a policing concept is still relevant and is still important, and it needs to be supported. Right. One of the early debates around community policing in this country, Lizette, you remember in the 90s, it was around the issue of budgets and where these budgets were located. Right. At that time, our view was that budgets must be located at stations. So the budgeting process must be at a station level and cascading into national level, not the other way around. Because this was designed, this for us, it will ensure that station levels are able to have budgets to implement their plans. So they're able to implement their own programs. So when budget is centralized in the manner that it is currently centralized, the extent to which the budgets can speak to local level situations, there's a discord, there's a disjuncture between budgets and the actual reality on the ground. So part of our value proposals has been that there needs to be decentralization of budgets. So that local level police stations have more to say about budgets, so that because the actual policing takes place at local level, does not take place in Pretoria at national level, it takes place right at the core face in communities. And this budget must speak to realities on the ground. And we think that, again, the issue of trust deficit needs to be addressed between communities and stations. And I think part of the relevance of this trust deficit, it is emerging in the context of high crime levels. And part of the frustration is that at times police see communities as a stumbling block to their efforts to deal with crime. But the reality is that communities play a very important role, because communities have more knowledge about who is involved in crime. Communities are required as witnesses. So part of what the orientation that needs to speak to the reorganization of policing is that it needs to speak to the extent to which the policing allows for working with communities more to deal with that trust deficit. Yes, technology is important, but communities are even more important if they can work together with communities. So over the years, what we see is that CPF have become less policy and strategy oriented, and less accountability focused and more operational. I mean, right now with the conversation within the policing environment with the CPF, is that CPF are requiring, for example, uniforms. We increasingly seeing them doing patrols. We're increasingly seeing them carrying firearms. We're increasingly seeing them doing operational work. And for us, that is unsustainable. Because part of why the reservist kind of program was introduced was to allow civilians who would want to become part of the policing system, the actually operational system, to then join using the reservist kind of system, but allow community police forums to be much more policy and strategy oriented. And I think there's been quite a lot of conflation, particularly in less affluent communities, because part of the approach that we see is that in less affluent communities, people join CPF to look for opportunities. And some of the opportunities that they are gatekeeping for is when there's a recruitment, that they must be first on the queue. But that was never how CPF were designed. CPF were designed to make sure that there's a collaboration between communities and police in dealing with issues of safety and security at local level. So CPF need to be more representative of communities rather than a collection of interest groups. This issue that I was talking about, CPF have become politicized. So if communities from across different political parties had this idea of a sense of community, almost like a sense of gated community. I think the concept of gated communities, it's a concept that says we are here and we are all concerned about this community, and we all play a role in making sure that we all ensure that we're all safe. And I think that concept is missing in many communities because of the politicization of community police forums. CPF can be active in patrolling and working at service centers. But again, when these things happen, our value proposition is that they need to be properly trained, managed, and afforded the kind of insurance needs so that they become effective both in collecting information, because part of what would be very important is to make sure that communities that are situated at station level are able, for example, to collect information related to complaints, and are able to engage immediately with station management to deal with complaints that are coming from communities, to foster that trust and to foster that collaboration and partnership. Next slide, please. I'm almost done. So what we have been doing around the work of the CPF has been to look at some of the tools, some of the skills that we think are missing, and we've designed a program that basically allows CPF to have certain skills. Some of the skills that we've been providing has been, for example, how to do safety audits, how to assess risk, how to identify risk. Because many communities, there are risk factors, but those risk factors, if communities are able to identify them and put them in the safety audits with the police, then the policing approach is most likely to be designed to be responsive to the issues on the ground in a particular community. So the safety audits on the safety or the policing approach does not need to come from Pretoria or anywhere else. It has to emerge from within a community, designed by the community to be more responsive to community risk factors. Community mapping. Some of the skill set there is around identifying community resources. What are the resources in the community? Who is who in the community who can add value? Who are the prominent leaders in the community? Who are the key people in the community that can be called upon when there is a civil service delivery protest or any other issue that the community needs to address? So part of the community mapping skills that we've been imparting on CPF is around identifying, making sure that it's a whole of community approach. Everybody is not left. Everybody is not left behind in dealing with the issues of safety and security. Safety program, designing specific programs in response to identified challenges. So that is a very important program, because then the programs are not just universal programs. The programs are localized to deal with the localized challenges. Early warning system. Here it's really around building a capacity of CPF, both to be able to prevent before incidents happen. So when you say eyes and ears of the community, part of it is that the capacity of communities to be able to gather information and be able to mobilize resources or mobilize key departments to come and deal with issues that may result in crime and violence, and be able to respond that. So these are some of the skill sets that we have been offering, that was continued to offering to CPF in terms of strengthening their capacity and their role in contributing to crime and safety in their own communities. I think this might be the last slide. Just check if there's another slide. Yeah. So that's my input. Thank you very much.
Are we good now? Oh, awesome. Okay. Thank you, Themba. I think this is working now. Good. All right. Thanks very much, Themba. That was quite thorough. There's a lot. Questions are just a buzz. But I'm going to allow Advocate Gillian Benson to give us her insights, followed by Thuli Nkomo, and then after Thuli, we will end with John Moodey. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to come and speak today. I've heard it said that we must never mistake law for justice, because justice is an ideal and law is a tool. But law is a very necessary tool to achieve even a measure of justice. And in this country, there's much distrust of the judiciary and legal practitioners, as well as magistrates. People blame the slow functioning of our courts purely on practitioners and the judiciary, which is largely unfair. People do not, or members of the public do not understand the circumstances in which the judiciary and legal practitioners have to function in this country. Budgetary constraints are a massive problem, and not enough is spent on the resources or the administrative tools that both the bench or magistrates or legal practitioners need to reduce the cost for litigants in this country. The cost of litigation in this country is something else. It is incredibly expensive to litigate. Most of us legal practitioners can't afford ourselves. And it's obviously a massive problem for members of the public, most of whom have the biggest problems, who are indigent. They are accordingly denied any access to justice. You can go sit in any maintenance or children's court in this country, and you will see the poorest of the poor unable to even come before a maintenance officer or a magistrate because of the unavailability of those presiding officers. I don't practice in the criminal field. I did many years ago, and I know that the problems that they encounter are even far more serious, and the lack of resources even greater. Yesterday, you would have seen in the case the blue light accused, the prosecution was criticized for so speedily bringing the matter before court. I would have thought that that was actually quite commendable. Be that as it may, ordinarily cases take forever to be enrolled in the criminal sector, and the civil sector, particularly in the Johannesburg High Court, being one of the busiest courts, and being my ground that I'm ordinarily in, faces many problems. We are so hamstrung in our operations owing to collapsing or broken infrastructure, unskilled administrative functionaries, and impractical technical tools. Specific to Johannesburg High Court, they, shortly before lockdown, digitized our court filing system and implemented case lines. In fact, I think it took operation in August 2019. And it really did revolutionize the access to the court files on a program online, and you no longer had to go search for your court files all over the court building when they went missing or when they got stolen, because now it was all digitally online. And that operated very well, and it was so fortunate during the lockdown. It was a commendable system. And then they introduced a further system called Court Online, not to be confused with case lines, which has made it incredibly difficult for practitioners to obtain case numbers on matters. It often has downtime. Practitioners can no longer just go into court and get a case number for their clients. You've got to wait for this program to work. And this now increases litigation costs for our clients, because your attorney is spending so much time just trying to get you a case number that they're not actually attending to the matter at hand, because they're so busy trying to deal with the administrative difficulties that they encounter on a daily basis. And when we do go to court, we have to climb over in the Pritchard Street, where the High Court is situate. We have to climb over litter and all kinds of other unfavorable items. After years of campaigning against it, we managed to get rid of a massive skip during the course of last year with the assistance of the High Court Committee appointed by the Society of Advocates, the Johannesburg Society of Advocates, and they really do work very hard, and they make every effort to make the lives of practitioners easier. There are other institutions. I speak specifically from my field, but the attorneys also really do make an effort to make our lives a bit easier. But now once you've arrived at the court building, good luck if the lifts are functioning. And it's not as if we don't have 4 or 5 heavy bags to take up all of those flights of stairs. The judges often also get stuck in their own lifts. They have to pay for their own tea and coffee. That is not even furnished to them, the judiciary. And yet they do arrive at work every day, most days, with a smile on their face and trying to do the best job that they can. Again, the bathrooms don't work at court. The chairs are broken. There's litter in the building. It's not particularly, I don't know how often it gets cleaned. And then, of course, the biggest problem is that and I know most people in this country haven't been to the CBD since probably before apartheid ended, but it is so challenging just to get from Braamfontein into the CBD. It's not just traffic issues. If you think driving in William Nicol is bad, just wait till you reach the CBD, because there's a different kind of law for driving in the CBD, unlike any other place I've ever been to. And the safety issues are of great concern. Legal practitioners and the judiciary are soft targets in the CBD because we stick out like a sore thumb. They can see our penguin suits a mile away, and they know that you have, and nobody else has any business being in the CBD otherwise, and they know that you have a laptop, and they know that you have a cell phone. You cannot operate in this industry without those 2 items. And so the cost of traveling to the courts has increased because most of the legal practitioners no longer want to drive themselves there. They would rather catch an Uber or employ a driver to take us, especially us female practitioners. We do not like to go alone. And so these small issues just start increasing the cost of litigation, which is already excessive. Then there comes the issue, once you've got past the safety issues, the litter, the elevators that don't work, is the workloads of the judiciary. Recently, last week, our Deputy Judge President, Sutherland, released information to us which gives you a far more insightful view of how the judiciary is overburdened. Now, postponements and unavailability of judges obviously leads to increased costs, and our clients complain continuously, but why do we have to pay for a postponement? Now we've got to come back in another year. We prepared for this trial, we paid for this trial, but this is the problem. So in the civil trial court in Johannesburg, there are 11 to 16 cases per day, which are scheduled to run at least 4 to 5 days each. 11 to 16 matters per day. And that has been largely reduced by the practice directives of our Deputy Judge President, because I remember a time in approximately 2017 where there were over 150 matters a day on the civil trial roll in Johannesburg. The same went for Pretoria. Now, in that civil trial court, you only have 4 to 6 judges available for the entire week. Now, how are judges supposed to be, between 4 to 6 of them, meant to get through 11 to 16 trials in a week? It's impossible. And the budgetary constraints for the number of judges that we have, presently we're sitting with 40 judges and in Johannesburg, and 11 of those are redeployed elsewhere, either to other courts or tribunals where, of course, they also don't have enough judges. 46 legal practitioners on a pro bono basis are serving this week as acting judge, this term alone as acting judges, owing to the shortage of the number of judges in our division. We have per week at least 60 urgent applications, and we only have 2 urgent court judges. The workload of the urgent court judges, and these are exceptionally important matters, often involving children, and you've got judges who are overburdened, who don't get to read the court files properly, and not owing to any fault of their own, but purely by the fact that they are completely swamped with work. We have 6 criminal judges for this term. 6 criminal judges in Johannesburg. And you look at the amount of crime that we have to deal with, and the heinous matters that these judges have to work with as well. You can imagine, for instance, having to sit in a 6-week trial, having to listen to Moodey murders as a judge, and having to look at the evidence that comes before them. You must understand the mental impact that must have on our judiciary, and it comes with that no mental health awareness or counseling for those people that give of their time to sit on the bench. We also have per week 60 opposed motions, and these are now complicated matters, civil matters, and it takes quite a bit of commercial experience to preside over these matters, and we only have 5 judges per week that have to sit and sift through 60 opposed motions in a week between them. His Lordship Sutherland, the DJP, gave us, in addition to the difficulty that we have with the number of judges in the division, the lead times from date of request for a set-down date and the date of hearing, as at 31 July 2023, is as follows. And again, I must stress that these turnaround times have been reduced due to practice directives which have removed some of the burden from the court roll. An unopposed motion court, which is generally not necessarily uncomplicated, it's just an undefended or unopposed matter, you will wait 6 weeks for a date. An opposed motion, you will wait 12 weeks. For a special motion roll, you usually have to wait an entire court term, which is approximately 3 months. For a matter to be to come before the family court, you're going to have to wait 3 weeks. Dedicated road accident fund default judgment court is 5 months, which excludes any court recesses. Road accident fund trials, you're going to wait approximately 9 months for a trial date. And this is not from time of institution of action. This is from the date that you apply for the trial date once you get to the point where you're ready for that date. Minister of Police trials, 5 months. Why we have so many of these matters before our courts is also turns again to the issue of trust between citizens and police brutality. General civil trials, you're going to wait 8 months, and for an appeal, you're going to wait a term. Now, again, if there are no judges, the matters cannot proceed. You are lucky if you come at the top and you manage for your trial to go ahead. Otherwise, it's come back next time. And again, you have to pay for your legal team to refresh their preparation because they've now done a million other things in between those postponements. And again, you're duplicating the costs. To make it more difficult to deal with the attempts at trying to implement information technology at our courts, it's all fair and well if it's practical and easy to use, but it's not. It has to be dealt with. It just delays turnaround times. As stated last week by our DJP, the efficacy of our litigation model is heavily dependent on an awareness of the dynamics and a cooperative attitude from practitioners. However, the public don't understand this, and they criticize our professions and our judiciary mercilessly, not knowing that these are budgetary problems. And unless executive government starts to apply its mind to all of the issues, from public works, who need to make sure that our lifts are functioning, to the litter in our street, to our safety as legal practitioners, you cannot improve access to justice. You are only going to continue increasing the already excessive cost for litigants, and it's going to continuously deny the poor and the indigent access to justice. There are only so many pro bono or NGO organizations that will litigate on behalf of these individuals. Often that litigation is misplaced. And like I said, just go sit in a maintenance court and see the most desperate people that can wait up to 22 appearances in any given year to finally even get a hearing before a maintenance officer. So a lot has to be done about it. The practitioners are trying, and I think people do need to spare a thought for the magistrates as well, who face the same problem the judiciary does. They're not trying to make litigants' lives more difficult, and many are working towards making it better. But again, it's an executive government difficulty. And Desmond Tutu said that to be neutral in a situation of injustice is to have chosen sides already. It is to support the status quo. We can no longer support the status quo, and we have to, as citizens, make great strides in trying to improve access to justice. Thank you.
I don't know how to feel. Wow. Thank you, Advocate Benson. Way too much to chew on. But definitely lots and lots of challenges for an incoming government after 2024. But work definitely has to be done to remedy the situation. Let me not waste any more time and allow Councillor Tulin Koma, attorney at law, to give her address, and then she'll be followed by John, and I think we can then enter into a Q&A. Tuli.
Good morning. I'm very honored to be here with my president and other legal experts. Today I will be speaking on opportunities for women in the legal field. I'm going to start by introducing myself. I was an attorney before joining ActionSA, and my law firm was actually started in the same month and same year as ActionSA. So when ActionSA turns 3, my law firm also turns 3. And one of the reasons that made me want to be active within ActionSA is how is how I saw the country deteriorating, and lack of opportunities for women, and you know, and the crime rates and all of that. And I thought I need to be a part of that. I need to be at the center of it all and make sure that I find a vehicle that can assist me to bring change. And ActionSA was that vehicle and the values I believed in. So I'm not going to go too much into my background. But yeah, some of the things that Advocate Gillian was talking about, I understand because I started as a judge's clerk before I did my articles. And one of the key things that stands out was when I wanted to go straight to the bar from being a judge's secretary. Thank you. The judge that I was serving under said to me, I wouldn't advise that you go straight to the bar. And I said to him, why not? And I became so angry at him. And I said, why are you saying that? And he said, I'm seeing the women at the bar. They are really struggling. They are not getting equal opportunities as men, and they're not taken as seriously. So I would advise that you go and do your articles in order for you to, I suppose, be taken more seriously by people because I was a woman. And he even went as further as to say, I'm not going to give you a letter of recommendation if you insist on going straight to the bar, because it's for your own good. And for me, that was, I felt resentful because here is judge stopping me from going straight to the bar, and now I have to go and do articles, which is something I didn't want to do. But be that as it may, our constitution and our laws, as well as international law, calls for gender equality. However, we're still far from that. The legal fraternity is way behind in terms of gender equality and women being taken seriously. And a number of factors that are responsible for this skewed representation is the pre-existing social network that is mostly made up of men, and it's a boys' club. When you're a female, you can't get briefs, you can't, you know, you're not taken seriously. I'm sorry, I know he's, I don't mean to lambast men, but this is true. And clients still view women as inadequate. We live in a patriarchal society that adds to that, and misogyny. So women are not taken seriously, even though we are capable. We're excluded from panels, legal panels in government institutions. And I've mentioned this before. I hate to be repetitive, but it must be mentioned. Women are not getting the same briefs the men do, and they're not distributed equally. And when you have a firm, it's even more difficult because the clients that you get are individuals. You're not part of the network that is made up of men, and it's difficult for you to get substantive matters from, for instance, big corporations or organizations and all of that. So we need to, and the judiciary as well, women are not equally represented. How could I forget that? We've got more male judges than we do women. So I think for us to resolve that, we need to adopt policies that will ensure that women are represented everywhere, equally represented. Even if we have to bring in a legislated quota system to ensure that the following happens, that women are, an equal number of women are admitted into pupillage or as candidate attorneys. Most of the time they prefer males to females as candidate attorneys. Why? I don't know. My principal was one of those. So when I did my articles, and we need to bring in a legislated quota system to ensure that equal distribution of work at the bar happens, and that more women are appointed into the judiciary, and that an equal number of women are appointed into government institutions. And female-owned attorneys are given support from the government and sanctions are introduced for law firms that have an unequal number of females representing them. If we don't take these measures, women are not going to be represented. It's going to be a boys' club forever. So that's just my input on this. And also another thing is that our male counterparts charge a whole lot more than we do as female. And that will ensure that, no, it's true. And in the end, even the wealthiest of our citizens will no longer be able to afford legal representation because they charge way more and they are allowed to. As women, Advocate Gillian will attest to this, she's not allowed to charge a certain number or else she won't get work. She won't get briefed at the bar. So it's unacceptable. How can we say that we want a justice system that works when women are not even making up 40% of the number? So that's my input today. It's Women's Month, so I had to speak for women. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Thuli. I think that was quite well deserved. That was very much needed. And I even forgot that it's Women's Month. But thank you for pointing that out. I think we always leave it out. And it's not just in the legal fraternity. I think the inclusion of women is just lacking across the board. I know that you know that we've got our women who are playing all sorts of sports, who are also fighting for equity and equality of pay because they do the exact same job for the country as the male counterparts do. So this is a very, very important one. And I think that in terms of how we move forward as an organization, the focus on women is going to be paramount. With that said, I do have to bid you all farewell. My colleague, Andre Kutsia, who is our organization's chief strategist, will take over from here. I unfortunately do have to vacate, but thank you to all of you who for helping us shape our policy in this way. We really do appreciate your participation. John Moodey, who is the National Director of Operations for ActionSA, will end this session just prior to the Q&A. John?
Thank you very much, Lorato. Yeah, colleagues, I think there's normally the pros and cons of speaking last. The cons is that everything you prepared has been spoken about. And the pro, of course, is that you just wrap it all up. I think I'm going to start off just quickly by distinguishing, just for the persons out there, what law and order actually means to me. Law is the rule that is set by society to govern the behavior of citizens towards each other and to protect the rights and privileges of all. The Ten Commandments is such. So it goes way back, where you have two or three human beings living together, there has to be rules according to which they are able to communicate with each other and to live together. And what is order? Order is an institution set up to monitor, uphold, and enforce adherence to the law. That is institutions such as the police, the courts, correctional services, social services, immigration, etc., etc. Now, the two previous speakers, that is more Lizette and Themba, spoke about the issues relating to us as South Africans, more specifically about the South African police services. Gillian spoke about the courts and the challenges we face in our courts. And I think to a large extent I'm going to focus upon what you spoke about, Lizette. We are products of our upbringing. Rule and of law, order, starts within our own family homes. It starts within the family structure. That is where your morals, your ethics, your morality is actually imbued within you. And thereafter you are influenced by the society that you grow up in, peer pressure, gangsterism, depending on where you are, and all those other institutions that a person goes through as you develop through life, your schools, etc. But you are taught to respect authority within your own home. And I think we need to go back to the previous dispensation, and I don't want to be accused of blaming apartheid for what we are facing today. But we have to go back, way back there too, because you talk about, what was it, ABCs or something that you spoke about initially? The ACEs, exactly. And I think it is very applicable here. It is about what we are being exposed to. And I speak just like Herman. Most of my life also grew up under an apartheid system, and of course being part of the revolution that took place for us to bring about democracy in 1994. The breaking down of the authority within the parental home, parental authority, creating that environment within the community that then forces community to make it ungovernable in South Africa and therefore bring down the status quo, the government. Now, history has taught us that wherever you have civil unrest and revolution, and South Africa did have a revolution, those monsters that you create to bring about that insecurity, to bring about the revolution itself, how do you tame those people? Because youth were used primarily in the 1976 up to the 1990s to make the country ungovernable. So yes, we had child soldiers in South Africa too, Stompie Sapai being one of them. How do you deal with that situation once we have a democracy, and how do you normalize society? History has taught us that you purge those so-called leaders that you have developed, and through a very strong-armed rule of law, actually purge and bring under control the unruliness, the unruly crowd that you, who are the perpetrators of a revolution, has actually established. And that fortunately did not happen in South Africa. And I say fortunately for a number of reasons. I believe in the value of life. However, there was an attempt to bring about some type of normalization of society, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission being one of them. I think the intention was extremely good. The process itself, many people speak about it being flawed. And of course, has it been followed through to the end? We also had many programs that were sponsored by international governments to bring about rehabilitation of those who are politically imprisoned, those who are in exile, etc. Where did all those monies go to? And I suppose we can labor that point. But when you create what we talk about as the lost generations, people who, because of the exposure to violence, it perpetuates violence. I am of the so-called lost generation, 1976, still a youth, 17 years old, and we took the fight to 1994. Many of us gave up our lives, but to a large extent, it was giving up self for the interests of the country. That lost generation that was taught to oppose authority have become parents. The aspirations that we had about the prosperous South Africa has failed us. Our children suffer as a result thereof, and they, by extension, have become parents. So you have a second lost generation and the possibility of a third one. How do we stop that? Therefore, our society is as unequal as what it is and as violent as what it is. And you've indicated that too. The statistic speaks to it. Now, I come from a policing background. I also served for 17 years on the Community Safety Portfolio Committee in the legislature in Gauteng. And the issues that you were talking about, Lizette and Themba, were issues that we grappled with as portfolio committees. How do we address the issues and how do we turn this spiral around? So we have a double whammy here in South Africa in terms of our challenges. And more people would focus upon the police and what they are doing to stop the situation, when it is actually a social, economic problem. And it has to be multifaceted for us to be able to really deal with not just the symptoms, but also the root cause thereof. And it's not rocket science. In fact, you don't need to go and re-establish the wheel, because I'm aware of the fact, and you have indicated to it, Lizette, that there has been studies done, that there has been plans put into place. And Themba, you also put down there the National Development Plan, etc., etc. I think where South Africa falls short is the actual implementation thereof. That is where we fall short. So what do we need? We need political leaders who have the courage to make those and take those difficult political decisions to implement things that may be unpopular for us to get South Africa fixed. The tools are there. That toolbox is there. It's about utilizing it so that we can bring about an effective change that we as South Africans deserve and are capable of achieving. And then, of course, let me just speak quickly about the SAPS itself. I believe that our police have become another dysfunctional organization in South Africa. It has followed this very same route as all our state-owned entities have. And we know where the root causes lie there too. And Herman, you spoke about cadre deployment. Lizette also spoke about cadre deployment. And you talk about taking people who are put into positions of power and leadership who are incapable of doing so. We also find the mixed match when it comes to, and Themba spoke about it, your CPFs, where it functions and where it doesn't function. And the irony of it all is, where it doesn't function is where it's needed most. How do we address those imbalances? And I think that that is the challenge that we face as South Africans. We must understand that unless we deal with the root causes, we'll just be dealing with the symptoms all along. The strategy worked in 2009, 2011. Why? Because there was a political will to make it happen, because we were forced to make it happen. The minute the pressure of the world was off because we needed to have that World Cup for whatever reasons, right? It was enforced. What we need to do is, I believe, that we need to devolve to a large extent the powers and authority of our policing services to our provinces, to our municipalities, and to our metros. Yes, we can retain a national police service, but I think by and large policing and the effective policing should happen at the local level. For the very reasons that we spoke about, whether you are closer to the problems and you are being policed closer to the problems, you are able to deal with those problems more effectively and efficiently because you are at the coalface. You don't need to wait for a level at the national level for you to be able to implement something that is of critical importance to us here at grassroots level. We speak about the economy that is driven through metros and municipalities, and I think that that should be the same approach when it comes to policing. We have seen how effective our metro police can be utilized in the fight against and the scourge of crime. Bringing in new, untrained, poorly trained, and poorly led patrollers, what do they call them now? Benazza Lessufi brought them in. Crime wardens is not the remedy. You are actually perpetuating the problem. We need to look at addressing the issues within our police where it is, and that is that we have poor, extremely poor leadership. And it has been a process that has been forthcoming, and you can see it through the statistics that you have shown on the table. It is there for us to see. When you have national police commissioners not being career policemen or women, you cannot lead. When you have an erosion of authority and respect for rank within your police services, you have a problem, because that leads to the lack of accountability. Why? Because of cadre deployment. We spoke about the fact that we need to bring back, and Themba, you spoke about it, we need to bring back performance management instruments within the SAPs and within our law enforcement agencies overall. And you spoke, Herman, about the issue of criminals being incarcerated. Because this doesn't just apply to the SAPs, to the courts, it applies to even our correctional services, who are just as inept to make things happen. In fact, very often you find people who are arrested for a petty crime, going to jail, and actually go to the University of Criminality. It is a matter of, as you were also indicating earlier on, other speakers spoke about it, the broken window syndrome. If you don't deal with the dumping, and you don't deal with that mugger who is able to blatantly go and mug a person in the center of town, and good people walk past, it speaks about a societal problem. You have to deal with those issues, and you'll be able to deal with the bigger issues. Organized crime is definitely a problem, and Herman, you spoke about human trafficking, something I spoke about in 2004 already. It is modern-day slavery. And organized crime is already a major problem to the establishment. If we don't sort out organized crime within the short term, we're going to be run like many other countries has been run by lords, drug lords and warlords. And it's something we as South Africans can ill afford to happen, not on our watch. But that's going to mean that we need to have a whole of society approach, but also a multifaceted approach for us to deal with this issue known as law and order. And I'm glad that we use the terminology law and order, because the rule of law means to many people nothing. But law and order means, how does it affect me? How do we apply the rules so that we are able to have order? And vice versa. So colleagues, I'm not going to be belaboring the point any further. I think that the previous speakers adequately spoke about what the challenges are we face as South Africans. And therefore, I'd just like to end off with this, Andre, please. We need to do a skills audit of all our senior police officers, in fact, throughout the ranks, and see how they are living beyond their means or not. We need, and that is the first step for us to root out corruption within our police services. It cannot be that you have the head of crime intelligence sitting with people who are known to be involved in organized crime at an event. This just happened over the weekend. It's a mockery. We cannot have, and may his soul rest in peace, a police commissioner saying that somebody is my friend, finish and clear. Cannot happen. We need to bring back professionalism into our SAPs. And how do we lift it over the short term? Because remember, we have a problem in our hands. It has to be dealt with here and now, but also with a longer-term implementation. And I believe that the best way to do that is for us to try and bring back the expertise that has left the service, the purging that took place after 1994, where you had good career police officers who believed that theirs is a calling serving us. And there are many, and I'd like to stress this, I believe that the vast majority of our police officers actually really want to make a difference, but they are not given the necessary guidance, they're not given the necessary tools, the necessary leadership, and more than anything else, the necessary training for them to do just that. If we can sort out those issues within our police services, I believe that we are a long way in remedying these problems that we face as South Africans, and we can restore law and order to this beautiful country of ours. Unless we deal with the law and order, everything else in our country is going to go to pot, because everything else hinges upon it, be that our economic development, be that everything else. It hinges on it, the safety of our people. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, John. For those watching at home, hi, I am Andre Kutsia, ActionSA's Chief Strategist, taking over from Lorato. We are now going to be having a quick 3-minute comfort break, and then we will be resuming with questions and answers before wrapping up at 1 o'clock. So if you give us 5 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, we will be back with questions and answers. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today as we are discussing law and order and the solutions that we need to fix law and order in South Africa. We have a couple of questions that we have received. I'm going to go through a couple of questions and then maybe just allocate them as I go along, and then we can do responses once we've got the list. Herman, I will be giving you an opportunity to conclude at the end, so you can decide whether you want to respond to questions or at the end. It's entirely up to you. Lizette, and maybe John, something that you would also want to comment on. I think both of you noted the importance of a community-based approach to crime and the socio-economic drivers of crime. I think often we focus on the symptoms and not so much the causes. And I think this is something that has come up throughout our policy process, is the sort of fraying of the moral fabric of society, for lack of maybe a better terminology. But what can we do from and I hate the term, but a moral regeneration perspective? I mean, how do we go about sort of getting back to instilling just respect for the rule of law from a young age? And I think John and Lizette, both of you either feel free. Herman, there was a question regarding our immigration position, which is, why do you believe ActionSA is so often misunderstood when it comes to immigration? Why do you believe that we are so often or easily branded as xenophobic? But I'll leave you to address that. Advocate Benson and Thuli and the legal colleagues, I think you sort of spoke to the challenges that we have in the civil and criminal justice system. I think we also know the challenges with the prosecuting authority. And I know none of us, well, as far as I know, none of you were specifically prosecutors. But I think the question is, from a solutions perspective, I mean, you highlighted a number of challenges. But sort of what is the underlying cause of those challenges? Is it a budget issue? Is it a leadership issue? Is it a way that people are appointed? I mean, if we want to sort of solve the criminal and civil justice system and address the challenges in our courts from a tangible interventions perspective, what are the kind of things that we can actually do? And then the last question was just around SAPs, and I think this is also something that a couple of you touched on, the leadership and politicization of SAPs perhaps. But if we want to work towards a professional police service, what is sort of the main 2 or 3 things that actually need to change, whether it's from a cultural perspective within the SAPs or from a leadership perspective within the SAPs? So I think let's start with those, and then we will see if we have time for any further questions after that. So maybe if we can start with Lizette and John, and then take it from there.
Do you want to? Thank you. Thank you. In terms of community-based approaches, so what Themba presented, I think, is still a really valid framework. But what we've seen, and the past week, we've seen what he highlighted there in red, where community policing forums went with a film crew, burst into the house of a alleged drug dealer, and things that are even illegal in policing terms were allegedly perpetrated. Now, that is where things where things go wrong with community policing forums, where we're starting to see the sort of move from as a force multiplier or community patrols moving into the realm of vigilantism. So I think we have to really take stock of what our frustrations are leading to, because what we are seeing is ourselves feeling emboldened to take law into our own hands or to break the law. So we desperately need better law enforcement. We desperately need our children to be seen that there are consequences. There's often, and this is a controversial one, but I don't mind, we often have the debate about capital punishment. So I'll just go there. And it's about what it is we are trying to achieve. We are trying to achieve a society where people are law-abiding and we have seriously reduced levels of violence and crime, and where we all feel safe and are safe. That's according to the National Development Plan and such. How do we achieve that? Minimum sentencing has done nothing for this country. And there lies the flag for capital punishment. If people do not believe that they will be caught, or if they are caught, they can bribe their way out of a situation, no sentence of any type whatsoever will be a deterrent. All it does is give power to politicians, as we saw in apartheid, where people were killed for doing very little, for just pursuing a dream of human rights and a life for all. So all I'm saying is, we need to teach our children that there are consequences to actions. That's how moral regeneration starts. It's not even about what those values are. It's about that whatever decision you make have got consequences. And this is where we all aim to go with law and order, is that there is a law and there is order, and you will be caught if you do something wrong. What the consequences are, we can debate. That's not the main issue. The main issue is we need to live in a society where we teach our children there will be consequences to breaking the rules. So we need to, I don't know, even in apartheid, growing up privileged, not really in these fancy areas, but as a white kid, there were things like Dainkie Cut that taught you rules of the road, and there was Zip It in a Zibby bin. There were like these icons that we were taught that gave us some moral compass, even though, you know, our children, our parents might be doing wrong. So I think we really need to look at other types of force multipliers. You know, what is it that we can, you know, the adopt-a-cop programs in schools is one thing, but not if we're seeing corruption in the streets by those same cops. So we really need to think through the solutions, but yeah, that's the main issue for me. And then in terms of violence, public violence, our society, we have learned that we need to stand up to elitism. And very often that elitism is now perpetrated or perceived to be perpetrated by politicians, by trade unions, where the normal person on the streets don't necessarily have a say, but these people, they have all the risk, and these people reap all the rewards. So the question is, how do we convince people that everybody that is in leadership is actually got the community's interests at heart? Because I think if we can get that buy-in, you know, we can win. But I'll stop there, but I would at some stage like to just say something about the xenophobic perceived narratives. Thank you. I'll get to the other stuff.
Yeah, Lizette's correct. I'm a parent. And I recall wanting to chastise my daughter. She was 14 years old. And she said to me, "The law protects me." Now, you know, corporal punishment, I think to a large extent at school we were abused by our teachers, and they took it to excessive lengths. But at the same time, I believe that if it wasn't for corporal punishment, I wouldn't be who I am. And I'm going to go back to biblical teachings. Spare not the rod. That's where I come from. That's my foundation. And unapologetically, I will say it. However, it has to be within reason, and I always believe that you should never, ever exploit those who are less fortunate than themselves, or those who are less powerful than yourselves. But it comes to the issue of the law itself. where it erodes authority and a parent is unable to exercise that responsibility. So my response to my daughter, and come back to that one, was, if you don't want me to chastise you and to carry out my parental duty and responsibility towards you, then you become a ward of the state, take your bags and go. Let the state look after you. And that put a stop to that nonsense within my home. You see, democracy is practiced within my home, but there is an authority within my home. And it starts with me as a parent, because I have the responsibility to imbue in my children what good ethics is and what it means to be a good citizen. Care about the next one. It starts there. And I don't think that any law can force that upon anyone. And then I speak about that lost generation. 2, I'm one, and there's others. But it's about what was instilled in me that actually takes it forward. I think we also have a role of organized religion that has to play within society. They already have a captured audience, if I may put it that way, or what do you use, the terminology, the political terminology when you have an audience, people that will vote for you. Constituency. They already have a constituency. And I think that to a large extent, also our social services come to the fore. And you're right about the issue of Zabit and Zibi. It is those minor things that we deal with. Bringing back, I recall us having to look at our nails. Our teachers looked at our nails, something that at that particular stage we thought was stupid. What is my cut nails and polished shoes got to do with teaching me, developing my brain? What it did teach me is hygiene. It also taught me about the rule of law. You look to the left first, and then you look to the right, and to the left again, and to the right again. When the road is clear, you cross over. What does red stand for? Stop. Orange, go. It is those little things that have to be brought back, I think, into the education system as well. That has an impact upon building who we are. Because state and family have to work together to be able to produce good citizens. So I think that that's an underlying factor. There is no quick fix, there's no silver bullet to it.
So, actually, Andre, when I first started practicing 21 years ago, I served as a prosecutor in state appeals, and I sat as an assessor in murder trials. And you ask me from a prosecutory angle what the problems are. Well, that's why I left. And why I went into the commercial field. I mean, I think every law student has these Ally McBeal or Lincoln lawyer dreams of becoming a criminal lawyer. And with the exception of those, I mean, and there are many that make much money out of criminal work. It's usually acting for the accused. If you work for the state, you get paid peanuts. And I remember I had a matter where I was briefed by the accused. Well, I was put onto the matter. We used to have compulsory matters we used to have to do for a very little pay. And my accused number 2, there were 6 accused. These 6 boys had gone into accused number 1's home and robbed his parents where he grew up while his parents were at work. And they then realized that the nanny who had raised him since he was a baby was going to tell his parents that it was them that had robbed his parents, and they murdered her. And I went to go speak to the prosecutor the following week, and I thought, no, well, I'm going to have to do a plea bargain here because, you know, these guys are so guilty, and what they've done is too terrible. And when I got to speak to the prosecutor in the passage, he said, no, he's dropping all the charges, and he just doesn't get paid enough to read these files. And I just saw the family sitting in the back of the gallery, and they were absolutely devastated, the deceased family. And I think that I was so disillusioned. And in the few murder trials that I ran before I left those grounds, the problem in prosecution, and I think I saw the other day that only 3% of our GBV cases or rape cases lead to conviction. It's very, very poor. And the reason for that is that the problem starts at the very bottom. So it's from the collection of evidence. You will often see police themselves destroying the crime scene before there is a proper collection of evidence, particularly in your more high-profile cases. The ability to store evidence, if you manage to get it, you'll recall that we've lost all of those DNA samples. And then, again, poor pay attracts poor skills. So your bright students and your bright practitioners don't want to get paid very little. Like in America, for instance, the role of being the district attorney is a highly paid job and very sought after. That is not the case here. And then when you do manage to get those top positions, such as we have, they need to be depoliticized. They cannot be affected by who knows who within the NPA. And please, I don't take away from those prosecutors who do have a calling and work very, very hard. I know many of them. But generally, your top students are going to go into private practice and they're going to run a commercial practice. So that is the problem. So it's from the collection to the prosecution. It's bad police work. The witnesses that they call, or the ones that they forgot to call, witnesses that go missing because nobody bothered to ask them for a phone number. It's so many things that affect successful prosecution in this country, but basically the will is absent.
Thank you. Gillian has covered me, but also to add to what Gillian has said, the prosecutors are overburdened, and as well as corruption. I hate to bring in the C word, but it's a fact. I've got a colleague who's a prosecutor, and he said to me, after 15 years, I've been passionate about doing this kind of work, but after 15 years, I'm actually tired. And I said to him, why are you tired? And he said, I'm tired of the things that are going on, the unethical things that are going on, matters being not being prosecuted because somebody gave somebody a brown envelope. They're not getting paid enough, the prosecutors. They're not getting paid enough, so they like taking bribes. It's corruption, poor skills, and they're overburdened. So that's why we have such a low rate.
Herman, would you like to
close?
No, would you like to address immigration separately or as part of your? In that case, I believe you want to. Would you like to just add to the xenophobia narrative question, Lizette?
So it has been, yet again, and you've been on the receiving end of a lot of criticism, and it is such a difficult issue to navigate, because at the one end we have just out of control organized crime, human trafficking, that leads to zamas. I mean, those poor youngsters are trafficked often. We are on the trade routes for heroin. There's a lot to unpack with organized crime. So, of course, the immigration issue, given what has happened in the past 20 years with porous borders and policy, has now led to this. And we've got the issue of service delivery shortages. So it's not an easy issue, but I think the issue that civil society and NGOs are feeling very, very strongly about, and the little bit of advocacy we try and do around this issue is just about how things are phrased and how the narratives. So it's about using undocumented instead of illegal. It's about being very careful. I mean, I've been trolled by the doula. They've come to our meetings. The last thing we need is for these groups to run rampant, to knock down doors, and then the police to follow them instead of and harassing citizens. What we need is prioritization, good strategies, workable plans. So I think for us, it's not an issue of course, what happens in Joburg is very different to what happens in many other places. The issues are enormous, but is also to maybe speak to people like IOM, UNHCR, and find out about just some of their initiatives to try and legalize people, try and find ways. I mean, there's a lot we can say about Joburg's desk, for instance, for immigrants and for business people. There's a lot of overhauling that needs to be done. So I really strongly suggest to speak to all these people and have these roundtables, because I think there's a lot of opportunity and to be leaders here and to have very viable sort of solutions that can be to the benefit of this country, because these people pay VAT. They contribute to businesses. If we can find those solutions, I think that is a very fresh approach, because there are many hope messaging almost that one can do around this. But that's just all I wanted to add.
Yeah, Andre, I want to just speak to, Gillian mentioned the issue of low conviction rate. Your detection rate is even lower, and the arrest rate is even lower. So crime pays. And the role models that we have in society, you talk about moral regeneration, suffers as a result thereof. So you go to school, university, become a prosecutor, and you're in peanuts, as you were saying, Joe, or a policeman. That other youngster becomes a drug peddler, and he drives a flashy motor car tomorrow. So given that environment that you come out of and that you are exposed to, and the morals and the ethics and societal norms that prevails there, of course, influences who you are. So it's a vicious cycle. It's about trying to get out of the poverty cycle. It has to be through an education for you to get out of it. And I think that that's where the problem lies as far as moral regeneration is concerned. But you spoke about SAPS and the leadership. I think leadership should be a process of application, of rigorous interrogation of the capacity of the individuals who are applicants, and for the best person to be chosen for the job, irrespective of color, of creed, and of gender. It is not about the color of the cat, it is about whether the cat catches the rat at the end of the day. And also the depoliticizing of appointments, because it would seem that the higher up you go, the more politicized it becomes. Because you know that a police officer, as a constable, I think they start off at about 15,000 Rand a month as a salary. But the guy wants to become a colonel and a general, you earn a substantial salary. So it is about those lucrative jobs at the end of the day, and how do you climb the ladder. And therefore, it is also about the influence that you have and the influence of politicians getting away with corruption. When it's right up into the presidency and nothing gets done. It filters through society and just makes people want to throw up their hands and say, in despair, and say, what next? And that is where the criminal element continues to fester and to grow, because it then permeates our police services as well. And remember, if you bring back the issue of assessments, of performance assessments within your SAPs, as in elsewhere, you'll be able to then bring in more professional individuals, and you need to make it attractive to them. The working environments is also of extreme importance to one. Sometimes we believe that people would want to enter into it just for a job. Yes, there are some of those. But I believe that those police officers that really want to make a difference, and I see them on a daily basis, we see them, it is the environment in which they are working in. Sometimes it's just the appreciation and the thank you for the sacrifices that they make to serve you and I, and just the recognition thereof. And that recognition should permeate through the fact that if I study hard and I work hard and I'm effective as a police officer and I equip myself, that I'm able to, in terms of a career pathing, be able to reach the top. At the end of the day, nobody wants to, there are few, want to enter into a service as a constable and retire as a constable. It's all about that as well.
Before I hand over to Mr. Mashaba to conclude, is there anyone else who would like to make any final remarks? Thuli?
I'm not going to take long. I've actually forgot to add to that what Mr. John Moodey said. The way you're raised also determines whether you're going to do crime or not, whether you come from a disadvantaged background or not. I come from a very poor upbringing, but I knew that at 6 o'clock I must be in the yard. And whether you're a boy or a girl, you must be in the yard. And after school, you must do your homework. If you don't do that, then there are consequences. So it's unfortunate that now there's no more corporal punishment. But that's literally how our parents made sure that we were, straight. We were on the straight and narrow. I knew that if I don't do what I'm supposed to do, my mom is going to she's going to clap me very hard. My dad didn't lay a finger on me. My dad dealt with the boys and my mom dealt with the girls. So I knew that if I'm not on the straight and narrow, there will be consequences. And as a result, till today, I will never take a bribe or do anything that is unethical. So that's how you can instill discipline from a young age. Unfortunately, now it's illegal, but we have to get creative.
Thank you very much for that. And I think, just to abuse my position for a second, also just to speak to the issue of immigration. And I think, this is one of the challenges that we've had throughout this policy process. And I've been working with Herman since he was the mayor of the city of Joburg and first started raising these issues. And there was obviously immediately this visceral response to that, especially in the context of the xenophobic violence that had taken place a couple of years back. And I think what has happened is, as somebody myself who was very much involved in actually writing what ActionSA's policies are, often the people who are the first to say, oh, ActionSA is xenophobic, when you ask them what do we stand for, they actually haven't bothered to interrogate what we say on paper. And when you read where we stand on paper and you start saying, well, actually we recognize that we welcome the people of the world to South Africa, but they must come here legally. I mean, I would love to go and work overseas and get paid in pounds. I can't just get on a plane to Heathrow without the papers in hand. And I think that basic idea of the international legal system of sovereign states, of border control in South Africa, I think often, there's this discussion in the context of immigration of asylum seekers and refugees. But a lot of the people who do come to South Africa admit to coming here for economic opportunity, not necessarily because they're genuine refugees or asylum seekers, but because there's a better chance of them getting a job here than elsewhere, which, fair enough, but the point is that you can't allow this to just go unchecked. And I think the point that we've always made as a party is that one doesn't have to, on the one hand, you have those who say, look, let's open the borders of Africa. Borders are an artificial concept and they don't exist. I think we're just recognizing in the international legal system, borders are very much a thing. And anybody who's tried to travel to Europe or elsewhere knows if you haven't got a Schengen visa, you're not crossing that line. And I think it's the very minimum that we expect in South Africa as well. But at the same time, you can be strong on border protection, but say that we want to make it easier for skilled migrants to come to South Africa. My stepmother was British and she wanted to practice in South Africa as a physiotherapist, and eventually just gave up because the process of getting the approvals and the visa she needed was basically impossible. And I think that's really where the challenge comes in, is because on the one hand you have a government who's driving away South Africans, resulting in a brain drain like our South African nurses that moved to the UK, but then at the same time we're not attracting skilled people back because to get visas is so difficult for them. And I think, as you say, it's about getting the narrative right. And I understand that sometimes that narrative doesn't always lend itself to 240 characters on Twitter, and I think that's where a lot of the misunderstanding comes in. But to simply talk about the issue in itself does not make you xenophobic. And I think that is where there's sort of an opportunistic side to those who want to criticize anyone who raises the issue because they conflate it with things that have happened in the past. But until we can have these conversations in a coherent and nuanced way, we aren't going to truly address the underlying issues. And I think the underlying issue is really a lack of jobs for everyone in South Africa, whether it's immigrants, whether it's South African citizens. I mean, this is just adding fuel to the fire of an already volatile, as we've discussed. When you've got all of these aces that are driving people to criminality, you then add on to this an additional strain on society. That is when you have a tinderbox that's ready to light society on fire. But on that note, thank you. I'm going to give over to Herman to conclude our session today. For those of you who have been watching at home, again, thank you very much for joining us. I think it's been an incredibly insightful conversation and some very interesting topics raised. But on that, allow me to give over to Mr. Mashaba to conclude today's session.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to all the participants and to everyone watching us from home. Let me first address this issue of why I'm being misunderstood, or our party is being misunderstood around immigration. I think it's a deliberate strategy. It's not really something that happens because people genuinely believe what they're saying. I think I've just really made note and ask you to read a book. This lady, an English woman born in Manchester in 1880, died in 1949, Alice N. Bailey, from the New Age movement. I mean, these are people who, unfortunately, are responsible for the evil that we are seeing in our country today. Because one thing to really, and I'm unapologetic about this, it's a fact in my life, in my lived experience, that for us as South Africa, unfortunately, we are led by criminals. I think that's the starting point. If we fail or we refuse to accept that our government, we are led by criminals, and that's my lived experience. For as long as South Africans are not really prepared to deal with this matter and put our heads in the sand, then we must accept the consequences thereof. Where I think the moral fiber of our society has been eroded, and eroded deliberately. I think you think apartheid eroded our moral fiber. Please just really do your research to see what has happened in the last 30 years of our democratic dispensation, be in education, our families, where we turn 12-year-olds into pensioners. We reward them by the time our young the girls reach the age of 20, they've got 3 kids, and be rewarded by the government with no knowledge of who their fathers are. We're sitting today in this country, 36% of the kids in this country don't know who their fathers are. You know, is this a mistake? Absolutely not. I don't really believe anyone must tell me this happened because of mismanagement. Please read Alice Bailey, and you look at the training of people who are governing us today. People we grew up thinking that they are liberation organization. Unfortunately, when they went into the camps, who trained them, because these are people who were trained not to really be military people. They were trained to disrupt and destroy. And I don't think any South African would ever question their success in the destruction of this country. I always use this as a point of reference when I discuss Johannesburg with my kids. My daughter at 28, my son at 26. Tell them Johannesburg 30 years ago was a real world-class city. They think that, please, you must be smoking something, and says, please, whatever you are smoking is too dangerous for you. The slum was Carlton Center was the best hotel. No, you must be smoking something that, and whatever you are smoking is really dangerous. Please, So all these things, they've not happened because it's a mistake. I mean, you look at our relationship with Russia right now, and you look at the history of that country from 1917 to date. I think Putin is bringing back everything else that those guys stood for from the time they took over power. And these are the people that our government is associated with. So, unfortunately, we're a society where you can imagine in a democratic dispensation, people go out and in a democratic environment, put in a cross to allow a leader who's a rapist, known rapist, to be the president of a country. I mean, yeah, you ask yourself, but what the hell is going on? I mean, it's not like Andre, we didn't know his behavior. No, this people know. This is a known criminal. It's a rapist. People go and put a cross, says, no, this is the person we prefer to really be the leader. So we've got a huge challenge in our hands for us to also at the same time embrace democracy. Unfortunately, democracy is something relatively new to us. People are under impression voting is to vote for those people that look like you, who obviously they've said to you that they fought for you. So if you want to punish them, you're heartful with them, you don't go and vote. So that is democracy to them. And that is why you see the outcome of the education system that our youth are receiving today is the worst in the world. I mean, that's proven. I'm sure all of us have got evidence. And it's getting worse by the day. 80% of public schools are dysfunctional. And you bring it to the attention of government, actually, they exacerbate it. That's why you'll have Angie Motseha and Blade Mzimande, the longest-serving ministers, who have proven to have been absolute failures, and actually failing as a teacher or as a minister of education, you destroy people for the rest of their lives, because you can imagine since 1994 how many lives have we really lost of people with no education. You destroy jobs, close down factories, put the ministers of trade and industry as communists, as ministers of trade and industry, to go out and destroy jobs, make people dependent on grants and the state, so that you give them that impression that you actually care about them. But in the meantime, you're busy destroying them, and so. That's why, for me, we need the intervention of religious leaders in this country to really assist. But that ultimately is going to be the civil society that is going to solve this problem or destroy this country. Because as long as people stay away from voting, one thing that they must accept, or we must accept, is the fact that we will have government. And that government must be decided by us. Whether we stay at home on the day of voting, we go and watch rugby or we go and watch soccer, it's up to us. But government we are going to really have. And that's when we have got to really decide what kind of government we want. As long as we don't really use merit as a measurement to the appointment of people, be in the private or public sector, we are doomed to fail as far as I'm concerned. How can you, as government, which fought racist-based national party policies, but you come out and actually continue perpetuating the very same system where you're getting society to pit against each other? Because once you run your country on the basis of race, you're going to get society to fight for limited resources, because resources will always be scarce. So instead of actually addressing this cake to grow, you shrink it, and then you get society to fight. it's unfortunate to my own personal experience as South Africans, we are more divided than we were post, pre-1994, which is really very unfortunate. Lizette, you mentioned something really very important. For me, and I've said this to Andre a few months ago, because I tweeted and I said, Andre, you know, I wasn't talking to him. I was just responding to someone on social media that, for me, I don't really believe with the level and rate of crime in this country, I cannot see how anyone will come out with a magic to deal with crime as long as we are not prepared to bring back the capital punishment. You know, I cannot see. If, you know, and Andre says, no, he doesn't believe. I said, Andre, absolutely. That's why we live in a democratic society. I mean, but that doesn't mean that if you don't believe in capital punishment, I should not really, you know, believe in it. And that does not make you and I enemies. You know. But I believe personally in capital punishment, looking at the level of high crime that we've got. I mean, the murder where you mentioned, over 70 people being murdered every single day. You know, I mean, how do you expect us to fill up the prisons? I look at South African women. Every time I look at you as women, I'm saying, how many times have you been raped? If not, when are you going to be raped? Because you've got a better chance of being raped in this country than anywhere else in the world. And rape, I think for me, it's one of those evil crimes that a man can commit against an innocent woman, where we even go to a level of raping 2-month-old babies. We go and rape 92-year-old women in their own homes. You know, because for me, as a woman, you get raped, including the Minister of Police says, no, this one was lucky he was raped by one person. I mean, you know what it does to you. They've destroyed, that person has destroyed your life. You look at this crime, this international drug dealers, who South Africa has become the playground for them. They're not only destroying our youth, they're destroying our families. I mean, I can tell you so many cases within my own immediate family of really dealing with this type of drugs that our youth are addicted. They're not just really destroying this youth, they're destroying our families. And someone must expect me, I must just say, no, there's human rights. What about the human rights of law-abiding citizens? What about the disruption of our families? And for as long as we are prepared to live within this chaos, then forget about prosperity, because there's just no way that the economy can ever thrive in an environment of chaos. So for me, the rule of law is really central to everything that I do. That's why I requested Andre with everything else. I know I was not in a position to attend all the sessions, but the rule of law one, I wanted to really be part of this, because that is what got me into politics. That's what got me to do this terrible job, because for some reason South Africans are more scared of a democratic dispensation than apartheid. Our people used to stand up and fight apartheid. Today, people are too scared to even being invited to come and participate in a platform like this, because they don't want to lose their jobs or to lose whatever. I mean, I cannot really believe what's happening to my country, that people were not scared to fight the apartheid system with their lethal reaction. Today, for a short-term losing of your position as a director or whatever, or a principal of the school, you don't want to really participate in a democratic process. For short-term, because South Africans, for some reason, that's why you look at, in terms of the saving, the measurement, we are the lowest in terms of saving, because we live for today. We're not a nation that that looks at issues from a long-term point of view. Because if you look at things from a long-term point of view, why should I really be afraid of these criminals that are running my country? Because yes, I can keep quiet, but at the end of the day, my grandchildren are going to pay a very serious price. And it's for that reason I'm saying to South Africans, the only way we're going to really come out with the laws that can save this country, we have to, first order of business is to remove this criminal organization that's running our government. And if we are not prepared to do this, then I'm saying to you, South Africans, then accept the consequences of living in a chaotic environment. Because once you can result into a failed state, countries that got independence before I was born, from that time when after getting their independence up to today, they are going from one crisis to the other. So are we as South Africa prepared to arrest this impending or potential problem that can really put us into a situation that would be almost impossible to reverse? Or are we prepared to say 2024 is a defining moment for this country? Otherwise, that decision can't be taken by me, can't be taken by us as ActionSA. We've just making the platform available to South Africans to say, let us save this country so that we can really fix it. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating in really giving up your time and not really being afraid to be seen around with us. Because you are not doing this for ActionSA, you're doing this for our beautiful country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Herman, for those remarks. I think if anything is clear from today, it is that crime is an incredibly complex issue in South Africa and something that there are a multitude of solutions that will really need to be addressing this problem. And I think as we work towards the policy conference, there are still many issues to debate. But for now, thank you for joining us today. And just for those of you who aren't aware, tomorrow we will actually be marching to Minister Bheki Cele's office to be presenting a memorandum against the dysfunctional police stations in South Africa, because I think what we recognize is that part of fixing crime is fixing SAPs. And that's not just about the police officers themselves, but about the political will to invest in our police stations and ensure that we are giving our good policemen and women the tools they need to really fight crime in our society. So thank you for joining us, and tune in next time. Thank you.